I remember sitting in my car outside a grocery store one afternoon, completely frozen. Not because I was cold, but because I was exhausted. Not just the kind of tired a nap could fix, but soul tired. The kind of tired where even going inside for bread felt like climbing a mountain barefoot. I stared out the windshield, watching people go in and out, and I wondered, how are they doing it? How are they living? I didn't want a new life. I just wanted some life, any moment that felt like mine again. And that's when I learned something simple that changed everything. You don't have to change your whole life overnight. You just have to give yourself one honest hour a day. Before we begin, take a deep breath. And if this message moves you, share it with someone who might be quietly struggling. Like, comment, and subscribe. Not for numbers, but to grow a community of courage and compassion. Not for numbers, but to grow a community of courage and compassion. We live in a world that glorifies the grand gesture, the all or nothing transformation, the dramatic comeback story. You know, the one where someone hits rock bottom, has an epiphany, and wakes up the next morning completely reborn. And we admire that because it's powerful, cinematic, inspiring, but most of us, we don't live in a movie, live in a quiet kind of ache. The kind that shows up between morning alarms and unanswered texts, between holding it together for others and lying awake at night wondering, is this it? And when you're in that space, not broken, but brittle, the idea of changing your life can feel like too much, like another impossible standard to meet, another pressure to become someone better overnight, when you're just trying to get through today. That's why I want to offer something smaller, gentler. Not a leap, a step. Just one step. What if you didn't have to overhaul your whole life? What if, instead, you just started with 1 hour a day? A single, quiet hour that belonged only to you. Not for productivity, not for results, but for presence, for healing, for breathing room. Because here's the secret no one talks about. That 1 hour, it's not a to-do list, it's a lifeline. It becomes the soft space where you return to yourself, without the noise, the judgment, the outside expectations. It's where you listen, really listen, to your own soul whispering, hey, I'm still here. That hour might not look dramatic. You might not even know what to do with it at first. You'll want to fill it with scrolling or errands or background noise, because silence is vulnerable and stillness can be scary. But if you stay just long enough to breathe, something sacred starts to happen. You begin to soften. You begin to remember that you are allowed to take up space in your own life, that you are worthy of tending to, not just when you've earned it, not when things are perfect, but right now, as you are. And when you give yourself that hour, again and again, it becomes a door that opens not to escape, but to enter more fully into your own truth. I want to tell you something that might feel radical at first. The hour you give yourself is not just an hour. It's power reclaimed. It's not about managing time. It's about redefining worth. You see, we've been conditioned, often silently, often since childhood, to believe our value is tied to what we produce, how we perform, how useful or pleasing we are to others. So we build our lives around the needs of everyone else. We pour out our energy for work, for family, for friends, for survival, and we learn to abandon ourselves so well, it starts to feel normal. We forget we're even missing. So when I say take 1 hour for yourself, I'm not talking about squeezing in a self-care checklist between tasks. I'm talking about something deeper, something that feels almost revolutionary, giving yourself permission to exist without performing. I want to talk about giving yourself permission to exist without performing. Something that means recognizing where you really belong. 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 It's not a timeout. That hour becomes more than just time on a clock. It becomes a mirror, a moment where you're not a parent, a partner, a worker, a fixer, a helper, a doer, just a human being. You, without the mask, without the script, just you. And here's what's wild. That hour doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sovereign. It says, I'm no longer waiting for someone else to validate my needs. It says, my healing matters even if no one claps for it. And that's what life is about. It says, my healing matters even if no one claps for it. It says, I don't have to be burned out to be enough. This one small act of choosing yourself, of honoring your space, your breath, your mind, that is power. Soft power. Quiet power. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Because when you start showing up for yourself in that hour, something begins to shift. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, you begin to make decisions from a different place. A place of awareness instead of autopilot. You begin to see your patterns, your stories, the ways you've been living small to stay safe. And you begin gently, patiently to outgrow them. And yes, it can be uncomfortable, even painful. Because reclaiming your power often requires you to confront where you gave it away. But it's worth it. Not because it fixes everything overnight, but because it reminds you that you were never powerless, just disconnected. The hour you give yourself is the hour you remember. Remember your voice. Remember your boundaries. Remember your fire. And the world might not notice at first. There may be no applause, no obvious transformation, but you will know. And over time, that knowing becomes unshakable. That quiet hour will begin to inform every other hour of your day. Not in productivity, but in presence. Because when you meet yourself with gentleness and consistency, you stop waiting to be rescued. You realize you've been your own home all along. There's this quiet, beautiful truth I've come to believe. Small habits are not small at all. They're sacred. They're the invisible threads that stitch our lives together. They're the gentle, deliberate ways we tell ourselves day after day, you're worth showing up for. But here's the challenge. We live in a world that measures progress in grand achievements. If it's not loud, dramatic, or posted online, it doesn't feel like it counts. So we overlook the quiet things. A morning walk before the world wakes up, 10 minutes of stillness with a cup of tea, writing something just for your own eyes, turning off your phone, and watching the sun change the color of the sky. But those things, they're not frivolous. They're not insignificant. They're love letters, written in ritual to the person you are becoming. Let me say this clearly. Every time you choose a small act of care, a small act of courage, a small act of truth, you are shaping your future, not with a wrecking ball, but with your own two hands. One honest hour at a time. I had a season where I kept telling myself I was just too tired to change. And honestly, I was. I didn't have the strength for a big transformation, but I had 10 minutes. That was all I could give. So I started lighting a candle every morning, just one candle, and sitting with it while I breathed. No expectations. No performance. Just me, the flame, and my breath. It felt silly at first, even pointless. But over time, I began to notice something. That little flame became a symbol of presence, of pause, of choosing me in a world that demanded everything but me, that settled into the center of my chest, like the symbol of a bond between humans. And slowly, I started to feel different, more rooted, less reactive, I made better choices. I began to listen to what I actually needed instead of numbing myself with distractions. I started to speak softer to myself, forgive quicker, say no with less guilt. All because of one tiny practice, one small ritual that created space for the truth to grow. You don't need to do everything all at once. You just need to do something with intention. And let me be clear, your 1 hour doesn't need to be impressive to be powerful. It doesn't have to be perfect to be worthy. It just has to be real. That hour becomes your training ground, not for becoming someone new, but for coming home to who you already are, underneath the noise. It becomes the place where new roots take hold, where quiet confidence begins to rise. Because change doesn't begin with lightning strikes. It begins in repetition, in devotion, in the way you tend to yourself when no one's watching. So don't underestimate the power of that 1 hour. Don't discount the strength it takes to make that space again and again. Even when the world tells you there are more important things to do, because those small habits, they are not just routines. They are quiet revolutions. There's something tender and terrifying that happens when you begin to slow down. When you give yourself that hour consistently, quietly, without distraction, you begin to hear things, not loud, booming revelations, not flashes of brilliance, but whispers, soft, persistent echoes of truths you've buried beneath years of survival, perfectionism, busyness, and self-neglect. And those whispers will ask something bold of you. Honesty. Real honesty. The kind that sits heavy in your chest and stirs up feelings you've tried to outrun. The kind that says, I'm tired of pretending, even when pretending is all you've ever known. And that's where things start to shift, not because it's comfortable, but because it's true. That hour, that quiet space, will start revealing the versions of you who never had a voice. The child who learned to be invisible to stay safe. The teenager who swallowed her feelings because no one knew how to hold them. The adult who became so good at coping that she forgot she was allowed to thrive. You may cry, you may feel angry, you may sit there in silence and think, I don't even know who I am without the chaos. That's okay. That's part of the process. Because here's what healing really looks like. It's not always soothing, it's not always pretty. Sometimes it feels like grief. Grief for the time you lost. Grief for the parts of yourself you silenced to belong. Grief for the years you spent being everything to everyone and nothing to yourself. And when that grief shows up, your job isn't to fix it or explain it away. It's to honor it, to sit beside it like you would a friend in pain. Not to rush it, but to listen. To acknowledge the courage it takes to feel things fully after a lifetime of bracing. Because when we stop avoiding what's hard, we finally create space for what's real. And in that space, a new kind of strength starts to grow. Not the armor you've worn, the perfectionism, the control, the self-sufficiency that kept you going when things felt unsafe, but the deeper strength of vulnerability. That's the kind of strength that says, I can fall apart and still be whole. I can feel lost and still be worthy. I can tell the truth about my pain without being defined by it. Your 1 hour a day becomes a container for that kind of honesty, a space where nothing has to be fixed and everything is welcome, where you can show up raw, exhausted, unsure, and still be enough. This is where healing begins, not with answers, but with permission. Permission to be human, permission to unravel, permission to not have it all together. Because in the unraveling, you don't lose yourself. You find yourself. And not the polished, curated, performative version, but the soft, strong, aching, radiant truth of who you are underneath it all. That's what that hour is about. It's not self-help. It's self-remembrance. And sometimes remembering who you are requires grieving who you were taught to be. So if it hurts, let it. If it's quiet, listen. If it's messy, trust it. That means you're doing it right. Something sacred begins to happen when you stay with yourself long enough. I don't mean staying with the polished version of you, the one who smiles through the struggle, the one who says, I'm fine, when you're anything but. I mean staying with the real you, the one who trembles, who doubts, who hopes, who tries anyway. And as that 1 hour becomes a rhythm, not a rule, but a return, you begin to feel something many of us forget is possible: belonging. Not the kind of belonging that requires you to shrink, to hustle, to prove. Not the kind you earn by fitting in, but the kind that says, I belong to myself. And that kind of belonging changes everything. Because when you belong to yourself, you stop abandoning yourself in rooms where your truth feels too heavy. You stop editing your voice just to be palatable. You stop tolerating relationships, jobs, environments that praise your silence and punish your needs. That 1 hour a day becomes your anchor, a quiet rebellion in a world that tries to pull you away from yourself. You begin to feel your own company as enough, not because you're trying to isolate, but because you're finally safe with yourself. You learn to trust your own rhythms, to hear the voice inside you, not the one conditioned by fear, but the one woven with wisdom. And that voice, she doesn't shout. She doesn't push. She invites. She says, go gently. Choose what nourishes. Say yes only when your body feels soft. Say no when your soul begins to tighten. You don't need to run anymore. Just be here. And maybe for the first time in your life, you believe her. Because when you show up for yourself every single day, even if it's only for an hour, you begin to realize something radical and beautiful. That you are not broken. You are becoming. That your softness is not a weakness. It's an act of resistance in a world that tries to harden you. That rest is not laziness. It's medicine. That presence is not passive. It's powerful. And as you keep choosing that hour, day after day, you start seeing that change was never about becoming someone else. It was about coming home. Home to the self that's always been waiting beneath the noise. And yes, the world may still demand, life may still hurt, but now you're not walking into your days from a place of depletion. You're walking in from a place of wholeness. And the ripple effect of that is enormous. You start speaking more honestly, loving more gently, holding boundaries with clarity and kindness. You parent yourself the way you always needed. You show others what's possible, not through perfection, but through presence. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to look in the mirror, not to fix or judge or critique, but simply to witness the miracle of your own becoming. That is what 1 hour a day can do. Not because the hour is magical, but because you are. And when you give yourself the space to remember that consistently, bravely, tenderly, you begin to realize you were never waiting for the world to change. You were just waiting for permission to change yourself. And now you have it. So I invite you to start today. Just 1 hour. Not to escape your life, but to meet yourself inside of it. 1 hour to breathe again. To feel again. To remember who you are under all the noise. This is not about becoming a better you. It's about becoming a truer you. And if you stumble, good. That means you're moving. Keep stumbling forward hour by hour. Because the life you want, it's not far away. It's just 1 hour closer.